There are over 160 water-type Pokémon. And somewhere between knowing that fact and actually understanding what it means, there's a whole ocean of stories, secrets, mythology, and little moments of accidental genius that most people have simply never heard. Tonight, we're going to drift through all of it. Section 1. The water type itself, the most common type in Pokémon history. Let's start right at the surface. Water is the most common type in all of Pokémon. As of Generation 9, there are over 162 individual Pokémon species that are water type in at least one of their forms, counting regional forms and mega evolutions. That's roughly 15.76% of every Pokémon ever created, making it the single most populated type in the franchise. No other type comes close. Normal type is the runner-up. Now, and even that doesn't match the sheer sprawl of the ocean. And the reason for that is actually kind of beautiful when you stop to think about it. The real world's oceans cover about 71% of the Earth's surface. Marine life accounts for the vast majority of animal biodiversity on this planet. Fish alone represent more than half of all vertebrate species on Earth. So, when Satoshi Tajiri and the team at Game Freak were drawing inspiration from the real world to populate the Pokédex, they had essentially an unlimited canvas the moment they looked at water. The ocean just kept giving them creatures to work with. Seahorses, jellyfish, octopuses, whales, eels, hermit crabs, mantis shrimp, sea dragons. The variety in real marine biology is so staggering that even after 9 generations of games, a Game Freak still hasn't come close to running out of inspiration. Fact number 1. Water type was one of the 3 original starter types introduced in Generation 1 alongside fire and grass. This trio forms what the games have always quietly referred to as the elemental triangle, where water beats fire, fire beats grass, and grass beats water. It's the foundational rock, paper, scissors of the entire franchise, and it was established right from the very first game. The water type, from the first moment it existed, was not some afterthought. It was one of the 3 pillars holding everything up. Fact number 2. In Generation 1, which means Pokémon Red and Blue for Western audiences, all water-type moves were classified as special moves. This wasn't a deliberate design philosophy so much as a technical one. In those early games, there was no physical or special distinction at the move level. Instead, the entire type determined whether a move used attack and defense stats or special attack and special defense. Every single water-type move, every single one, drew from the special stat. This meant that in those original games, a Pokémon like Gyarados, which has a famously sky-high attack stat, could not actually make proper use of water-type moves in battle because they all use the special stat, which is comparatively far lower on Gyarados. This was finally corrected in Generation 4 when the physical special split was introduced, and individual moves were given their own classification. From that point forward, moves like Waterfall became physical, while Hydro Pump remained special. It changed the entire competitive landscape for water types, particularly for Gyarados, which finally got to use its real attacking power on a water-type move. Fact number 3. Water type has been paired with every other type in the game. After the introduction of Volcanion in Generation 6, which is a fire and water-type Pokémon, the last available pairing was filled. Water became only the second type in franchise history to have been combined with every single other type at least once, with the first being flying type. This is a remarkable statistic when you consider how many types there are. There are 18 types in total, meaning there are 171 possible dual-type combinations, and water has now touched every single one of them. No other type, except flying, can say the same. This also explains why water-type Pokémon are so versatile in competitive play. A water and poison type reacts very differently in battle from a water and dragon type, or a water and steel type like Empoleon, or a water and dark type like Greninja. Fact number 4. Water type has the highest number of evolutions that require trading in the entire game. Pokémon like Slowking, Politoed, Gorbis, and Huntail all require a trade to evolve, and all of them are water types. This quirk comes from the franchise's original emphasis on trading as a core mechanic of the games. In the early days, before the internet made everything simpler, trading required you to actually connect 2 Game Boys with a link cable and find another player. The water types that needed trading to evolve were, by design, rarer and more difficult to obtain. They had a feeling of prestige around them, because actually getting one meant either having a friend who also played or being lucky enough to live near someone with the game. Fact number 5. The water type Arceus plate is called the Splash Plate. When Arceus holds the Splash Plate, it becomes a water type, and its signature move judgment becomes a water type attack. The name is a direct nod to Magikarp's signature useless move, Splash, which we'll be talking about quite a bit tonight. It's one of those small, gentle pieces of fan service that the developers at Game Freak have always been genuinely good at embedding in the games when you least expect it. Fact number 6. Generation 1 introduced the most water-type Pokémon of any generation. When Red and Green launched in Japan in 1996, there were exactly 32 new water-type Pokémon introduced. No subsequent generation has matched that number. The generation that introduced the fewest water types was Generation 6, the Kalos region, which introduced only 9. This pattern reflects something interesting about how the franchise evolved. In the early days, water type was being populated from scratch, and Game Freak had an enormous real-world catalog to draw from. As the franchise matured, each generation became more intentional about what it added, with a focus on unique designs rather than sheer quantity. Fact number 7. When it rains in battle, and rain can be caused by the move Rain Dance or by abilities like Drizzle, water-type moves get a 50% power boost. This has enormous implications for competitive play because water types already tend to be bulky and hit hard, and under rain, they become even more powerful. However, in extremely harsh sunlight created by an ability like Desolate Land, the signature ability of Primal Groudon, water-type moves fail entirely. Not reduced, not weakened. They simply do not work. It's one of the most dramatic type interactions in the game, and it reflects the ancient lore about Groudon and Kyogre's eternal conflict, which we'll be exploring in detail later tonight. Fact number 8. The move Freeze Dry, introduced in Generation 6, is super effective against water-type Pokémon despite being an Ice-type move. Under normal circumstances, Ice-type deals neutral damage to water-type, because both types share some thematic overlap, and because Game Freak has generally treated Ice as a counterpart rather than a predator to water. But Freeze Dry is the exception. The flavor reasoning is that Freeze Dry represents a rapid, violent freezing that evaporates moisture outward rather than simply chilling it, meaning it's specifically dangerous to creatures made of or dependent on water. In practice, this move exists largely to give players a way to deal with pure water-type Pokémon that would otherwise resist most attacks. Fact number 9. Water-type moves are notable for being extremely common in the movesets of non-water-type Pokémon. A huge number of Pokémon that are not water-type at all can still learn Surf, Waterfall, or even Hydro Pump. This cross-type availability is unusual and reflects water-type's thematic universality. Almost any Pokémon can logically be imagined near water, splashing through it, or using it in some way, which is why the designers were generous in distributing water-type moves across the broader Pokédex. Fact number 10. The Torrent ability, shared by every water-type starter Pokémon, increases the power of water-type moves by 50% when the Pokémon has 1/3 or less of its HP remaining. This is the water-type's equivalent of Blaze for fire starters and Overgrow for grass starters. It's a comeback mechanic that has saved countless battles over the years. A Blastoise at low health firing off a torrent-boosted Hydro Pump is a genuinely scary proposition, and it's one of the little design details that makes the starter Pokémon feel special throughout the entire game, not just at the beginning. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are in the world right now, and what time it is. I always love hearing from people watching from all over, and if you haven't already, subscribing takes 2 seconds and helps so much more than you know. Section 2. Magikarp and Gyarados, the most patient fish in history. Of all the water-type Pokémon in existence, none carries as much symbolic weight as Magikarp. And the story behind this floppy, seemingly useless fish is genuinely remarkable. Fact number 11. Magikarp is based on the Asian carp. More specifically, it draws heavily from the common carp and certain types of koi fish, which is reflected in its original Japanese name, Koi King, or Koi Kingu in Japanese. Koi are iconic in East Asian culture, deeply associated with perseverance, determination, and the aspiration towards something greater. These are not coincidental parallels. Fact number 12. The entire concept of Magikarp evolving into Gyarados is based on a specific Chinese legend known as the Dragon Gate story, or the legend of the Koi's ascension. According to the myth, if a carp could swim upstream through a powerful waterfall called the Dragon Gate, it would be transformed into a dragon as a reward for its perseverance and effort. The story was not about brute strength, it was about determination in the face of something that seemed impossible. A lowly fish, seemingly too weak to matter, achieves something extraordinary through sheer persistence. In Pokemon terms, the journey from a level 1 Magikarp to a level 20 Gyarados is almost a direct gameplay translation of that myth. The training is the river. The evolution is the leap over the waterfall. Fact number 13. Magikarp's signature move in the original games, the move known internationally as Splash, is actually a mistranslation. In Japanese, the move is called Hanaru, which is much better translated as hop. The move has nothing to do with water. It's about jumping, flopping around. That's the whole thing. This explains a detail that confused many players for years. Pokemon like Hoppip and Spoink, which have absolutely no connection to water, can also learn Splash. They're not splashing, they're hopping. The word was simply translated as splash for the English release, presumably because Game Freak wanted to lean into the watery association with Magikarp, and the name has stuck ever since, spawning decades of gentle confusion. Fact number 14. Despite being called Splash in English, the move is normal type, not water type. Not then, not now. It has never been a water type move in any generation of the games, because it was never really about water. Fact number 15. In Pokemon Stadium for the Nintendo 64, Magikarp had its own dedicated minigame called Magikarp's Splash. The objective was exactly what it sounds like. Players competed to see whose Magikarp could splash, meaning jump, and hit a counter button above them the most times in a set period. It's a beautifully absurd game that somehow perfectly captures the spirit of Magikarp while also being genuinely fun in short bursts. Fact number 16. The shiny version of Magikarp is golden rather than the standard orange-red. Golden koi are considered especially auspicious and beautiful in Japanese culture, making the shiny coloration a deliberate and meaningful choice rather than a random palette swap. But when Magikarp evolves into Gyarados, its shiny form is red rather than blue, making shiny Gyarados one of the most visually striking shinies in the entire franchise. Fact number 17. Gyarados is not actually a dragon type despite looking and behaving in every respect like one. It's water and flying, which is a combination that surprises most new players when they first discover it. The flying designation is connected to the koinobori, the Japanese tradition of hanging large carp-shaped windsocks or kites during Children's Day celebrations on May 5th. These koi-shaped banners fly through the air like great serpents, and the imagery informed Gyarados' identity as something that transcends its physical form to become something aerial and overwhelming. Fact number 18. In Gyarados' original Japanese beta development, it had a completely different design that was described as resembling an eyeless worm-like creature with sharp teeth. This design was abandoned in favor of the fierce, serpentine, traditionally dragon-like appearance the world knows today. The beta name that had been assigned to it in early English localization discussions was Skullkraken, a combination of Skulk and Kraken, but the developers ultimately kept the Japanese name. Fact number 19. There is a long-standing fan theory based on visual evidence suggesting that Magikarp and Gyarados were originally meant to be part of the Dratini and Dragonite evolutionary line, or at least that the two lines were swapped at some point during development. The evidence cited includes the visual similarities between Magikarp's orange coloring and golden barbell whiskers and Dragonite's orange color scheme, and the fact that Gyarados' long blue serpentine form closely resembles Dratini and Dragonair. Game Freak has never commented on this theory, which has kept it alive for nearly 3 decades. Fact number 20. Primal Kyogre, the superpowered ancient form of the Hoenn legendary, has a base special attack of 180 and a base special defense of 160. These are the highest such stats of any water-type Pokemon in the franchise. However, the highest special attack available to a non-legendary water type belongs to Mega Blastoise, sitting at 135. Fact number 21. A Magikarp living for many years, according to its Pokédex entries, can use Splash to leap over entire mountains, and the move remains completely useless in battle. Nothing happened. Fact number 22. Magikarp's Pokédex entries describe its ancestors as having been significantly stronger. Scientists in the Pokemon world have devoted actual research to understanding why Magikarp degenerated so dramatically over generations. This is a genuinely interesting piece of world building. The implication is that at some point in the distant past, Magikarp was not a joke. It was something. Time and perhaps a lack of evolutionary pressure reduced it to what it is today, though it retained just enough potential to become Gyarados under the right circumstances. Fact number 23. In Pokemon Snap for the Nintendo 64, one of the most satisfying moments in the game involves Magikarp directly referencing the Dragon Gate myth. In the Valley level, if the player hits a Magikarp into the water at the beginning and then travels down the course, a Magikarp can be seen struggling at the base of a waterfall. If the player hits it again at the right angle, it will leap up and over the waterfall, vanishing. When the player rounds the bend, Gyarados is there. It's one of those pieces of interactive storytelling that doesn't explain itself at all, trusting the player to recognize what they just watched. Fact number 24. During the time of Pokemon Go's enormous popularity in 2016, a Magikarp candy promotion led to people walking hundreds of kilometers to accumulate the 400 candies needed to evolve a single Magikarp into Gyarados. Players tracking their steps for the sole purpose of evolving this one Pokemon turned the ancient Dragon Gate myth into something people literally lived out in real urban parks and streets. It's one of the stranger moments where the franchise's mythological underpinnings collided with real human behavior. Fact number 25. Gyarados' Mega Evolution, introduced in Generation 6, changes its typing from water and flying to water and dark. The transformation is extreme. Mega Gyarados gains a black and red color scheme and a face twisted into something deeply threatening. The lore around it suggests that Mega Gyarados is described as completely consumed by rage, so overtaken by destructive instinct that it no longer recognizes allies or trainers. The addition of dark typing mechanically reflects a Pokemon that has essentially lost its mind, which is thematically coherent with the Pokédex description of normal Gyarados as a creature that, once it starts rampaging, will not stop until it has destroyed everything around it. Section 3. The Water Starters. From Squirtle to Quaxly. There have been 9 mainline generations of Pokemon games, and each one has offered a Water-type starter. These starters form their own quiet lineage, a line of aquatic creatures stretching from 1996 all the way to the present. Each one tells a story about what Game Freak was interested in at the time, what the franchise was trying to do, and what kind of creature they felt best embodied the spirit of water type at that moment. Fact number 26. Squirtle, the Kanto water starter. Doubt is based on a turtle. Its name is a combination of squirt and turtle. The Japanese name, Zenigame, translates roughly to pond turtle, referring to a specific small freshwater turtle common in East Asia. Squirtle's evolutionary line follows a clear escalation of size and armor. Wartortle gains ear-like blue fur and a fluffy tail associated in Japanese folklore with longevity, specifically the tails of older mythological turtles. Blastoise, the final form, centers entirely on the twin cannons built into its shell, which are capable of firing water at pressures high enough to pierce through thick steel. Fact number 27. Blastoise has the highest base special defense of any fully evolved water starter in the franchise. It was always the defensive powerhouse of the original Kanto trio, and its design philosophy emphasized durability and the ability to outlast opponents rather than simply overwhelm them with raw power. In competitive play across multiple generations, Blastoise carved out a niche as a reign setter and a reliable physical wall. Fact number 28. Squirtle's design was originally conceived with the idea that it represented a Pokemon that had grown confident and mischievous over generations of being around human trainers. The famous Squirtle Squad from the early anime, a group of sunglasses-wearing Squirtle living in the wild and acting as troublemakers, was designed to reflect this interpretation. They wore their sunglasses like gang insignia, communicating something cheeky and defiant about Squirtle's personality. Fact number 29. Watch the Squirtle evolutionary line appears in the Isle of Armor regional Pokédex in Sword and Shield. One of the few cases where a classic Kanto starter was included in a non-Kanto game through DLC. Blastoise also received a Gigantamax form in Generation 8, which transforms it into a massive artillery platform, with dozens of smaller cannon holes appearing across its shell alongside the two primary water cannons. The design is spectacular and feels like a logical extreme of what Blastoise was always hinting at. Fact number 30. Totodile, the Johto water starter, is based primarily on a crocodilian, specifically drawing from both alligators and crocodiles. Its name combines tot, suggesting youth, with dial from crocodile. The Japanese name, Waninoko, means small crocodile. Totodile became something of a fan favorite very quickly, largely because of its characterization in the anime. Ash's Totodile in the Johto arc was played entirely for comedy, a little crocodile that would randomly break into dance in the middle of serious situations, grinning broadly at everything and generally being chaotic good incarnate. Fact number 31. Feraligatr, Totodile's final evolution, was notably constrained by the character limit in Pokemon's early games. The Nintendo Game Boy games had an 11-character limit for Pokemon names, which is why the correct spelling is Feraligatr without the final letter E, because Feraligatr would have been 12 characters. This constraint was a technical limitation of the original hardware, not a stylistic choice. The name was simply truncated to fit. Fact number 32. Fact number Demaberban. Mudkip from the Hon region is one of the most genuinely beloved starter Pokemon in franchise history. The creature became a cultural landmark in the early internet era, largely because of a meme that began around 2005, reading simply, "So I heard you leak Mudkips," featuring an image of a Mudkip looking directly at the viewer. The meme was nonsensical and delightful and spread so widely that Mudkip became one of the most recognized Pokemon among people who had never actually played the games. It transcended the franchise and became something else entirely. Fact number 33. Mudkip is based on multiple real-world animals simultaneously, which is unusual even by Pokemon design standards. The primary inspirations include the Mud Puppy, which is a fully aquatic salamander, the Mudskipper, which is a fish capable of breathing air and moving on land, and possibly the Axolotl, a Mexican salamander that retains its larval features into adulthood through a process called neoteny. The fin on Mudkip's head and its amphibious qualities come from a careful blend of all three. Fact number 34. Swampert, Mudkip's final evolution, has a notably unusual typing. It's water and ground, which gives it a single weakness, electric type, while granting it resistance or immunity to a huge number of common attacking types. This typing was rare enough at the time that it gave Swampert a distinct competitive identity, and it remains one of the most mechanically efficient dual types in the game. Fact number 35. Piplup from the Sinnoh region is based on penguins, specifically the Emperor Penguin. And its evolutionary line moves through Prinplup into Empoleon, and Empoleon holds the unique distinction of being the only water and steel-type starter in the franchise. This combination gives Empoleon resistance to 10 different elemental types, making it one of the most defensively robust starter evolutions ever created. The steel typing comes from the design language of Emperor Penguins, which have a regal bearing that Game Freak chose to interpret as metallic and blade-like, giving Empoleon its wing blades and imperial name. Fact number 36. The name Empoleon contains a reference to Napoleon Bonaparte. Emperor Penguins plus Napoleon equals Empoleon. It's one of those name constructions that seems obvious in retrospect but is genuinely clever. Fact number 37. Martin. Piplup became a fixture of the Diamond and Pearl anime largely because of Dawn, the female protagonist of that arc who chose Piplup as her starter. Dawn's Piplup was famously reluctant to evolve and ultimately never did, remaining a Piplup throughout the entire series. This became a running arc that mirrored the earlier situation of Ash's Pikachu refusing to evolve, and it was handled with real emotional weight, particularly in the moments where Piplup internally wrestled with the question of whether evolving meant leaving something important behind. Fact number 38. Oshawott from Unova was based on the sea otter. The shell it carries, called a scalchop, is a key part of its design identity, as sea otters famously use rocks as tools to crack open shellfish and typically carry a favorite rock in a skin pouch. Oshawott scalchop is a weapon, a shield, and a personal item simultaneously, which gives it a quiet depth of character for a first-stage starter. Its final evolution. Samurott referenced Japanese samurai culture and the Hisuian form of Samurott introduced in Pokémon Legends. Arceus changed its typing to water and dark, giving the line a moodier and more aggressive incarnation set in a much older version of the Pokémon world. Fact number 39. Froakie and its final evolution. Greninja from the Kalos region became perhaps the most competitively successful starter final evolution in franchise history. Greninja has the highest base speed stat of any starter final form, sitting at 122, and its ability Protean allowed it to change type with every move it used, making it extraordinarily difficult to predict and defend against in competitive battles. It was eventually banned from certain formats for being too powerful. Fact number 40. Greninja's design draws from the Japanese folkloric hero Jiraiya, who appears in a story from the early 19th century called The Tale of the Gallant Jiraiya. In that story, Jiraiya is a legendary ninja who can transform into a giant toad. Greninja does not transform, but it blends ninja aesthetics with frog biology so seamlessly that the reference reads immediately to anyone familiar with the source material. Fact number 41. Ash Greninja, introduced in the Sun and Moon games and anime, represents a unique mechanic called Battle Bond, where a particularly deep connection between a Greninja and its trainer allows it to partially transform during battle, taking on physical characteristics resembling its trainer's appearance. Ash Greninja was a different Pokemon mechanically from regular Greninja, and the anime spent considerable time building the emotional relationship that made the transformation possible. It remains one of the most personalized and character-specific Pokemon forms in franchise history. Fact number 42. Popplio from Alola has one of the most dramatic redemption arcs in terms of initial fan reception. When the Sun and Moon starters were first revealed, Popplio was widely mocked, with fans calling its design clunky and its circus seal concept uninspiring. By the time the games were released and players had spent time with it, Popplio's evolutionary line through Brionne and into Primarina, which is a water and fairy type sea lion opera singer inspired by sea maiden myths, had completely won people over. Primarina's special attack stat of 126 is the highest of any fully evolved starter in the franchise. Fact number 43. Sobble from Galar was designed around the concept of a chameleon that could turn invisible in water. It's based on a blue-tongued skink crossed with the properties of a chameleon, giving it a unique ability to blend into its surroundings. Inteleon, its final evolution, is a spy lizard with a sniper's focus, and its Gigantamax form deploys a massive water sniper rifle built from its fingers. It's delightfully absurd and completely coherent as a design. Fact number 44. Quaxley from Paldea is based on a duck, specifically drawing from the visual aesthetic of traditional European operatic and theatrical costume design. Its final evolution, Quaquaval, is water and fighting, a dancing duck warrior in a feathered carnival costume. When it was first revealed, it triggered significant debate online, and it became something of a litmus test for what fans wanted the franchise to be. The theatrical, flamboyant design divided people, but it fit perfectly within the Spanish-influenced Paldea region, where carnival culture is a genuine part of the national identity. Section 4. Misty, the tomboyish mermaid. There is no figure more associated with water-type Pokémon in the cultural memory of the franchise than Misty. Fact number 45. Misty's Japanese name is Kasumi, which translates to mist or haze. The English localization team explained in January 1999 that because the English word for Kasumi is mist, they adjusted the name by adding Tai to make it sound more distinctly feminine. It was a simple practical decision that produced one of the most recognizable names in the franchise. Fact number 46. Misty was originally planned to be the third gym leader in the Kanto region, not the second. During development of the original Red and Green games, the gym order was adjusted before release, and Misty was moved to the second position. This change affected how early players would encounter water type as a challenging element, given that in the early game most starter choices would have a significant disadvantage against her team. Fact number 47. Misty's role in the anime was substantially expanded from her in-game presence. In Pokemon Red and Blue, she was simply the second gym leader who handed out the Cascade badge and gave the player TM11, which contained Bubble Beam. The anime turned her into a fully developed character with sisters she resented, a complex about not being taken seriously, and a genuine dream of becoming a water-type master. None of that existed in the original game. Fact number 48. Misty's initial motivation for traveling with Ash in the anime had nothing to do with adventure or Pokemon training. Ash had borrowed her bicycle in the very first episode while trying to rush Pikachu to a Pokemon Center after being attacked by a flock of Spearow. Pikachu's electric attack during that chase completely destroyed the bicycle. Misty followed Ash across 2 full regions demanding he replace it. The bike was eventually repaired by a Nurse Joy in Viridian City, but by that point Misty had decided she wanted to stay. When her repaired bike was finally returned to her at the end of the Johto arc, it coincided almost exactly with the moment she needed to return home to run the gym, and the timing gave her departure a genuinely bittersweet quality. Fact number 49. One of the most understated details about Misty is her fear of bug-type Pokémon. She is a water trainer who worships aquatic creatures but is completely undone by anything with too many legs. This phobia was a recurring source of comedy in the early anime and was used as a genuine character element. Her disgust was always played very specifically, not as simple squeamishness, but as something deeper and more irrational. Fact number 50. Misty's Japanese voice actress Mayumi Izuka stated in interviews that when she auditioned for the role, the director asked her simply to act like herself. Her natural personality translated so directly into Misty's spirited, competitive, occasionally explosive temperament that she landed the role on that basis alone. She has described Misty as the character she has voiced who feels most genuinely like herself. Fact number 51. In the Pokemon Adventures manga, Misty's characterization is meaningfully different from the anime. In the manga, she's quieter, more strategic, and her relationship with Red is collaborative rather than combative. One of the more striking moments involves Suicune itself choosing Misty as a worthy trainer, which elevated her importance in the Gold and Silver arc of that story significantly. Fact number 52. Misty is the first female gym leader to appear in the core series games. This is easy to overlook because she's been there from the very beginning, but it's worth noting that the tradition of female gym leaders, which eventually expanded to include leaders like Whitney, Flannery, Fantina, Elisa, Roxy, Nessa, and many others, starts specifically with the water trainer in Cerulean City. Fact number 53. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, the Fame Checker entries include a detail about Misty's aspirations. One of the entries reads that she trains at Seafoam Islands, and another mentions that she has high hopes for Cerulean Cape, described as a famous romantic date spot. These small pieces of characterization give Misty a private life that extends beyond battling, showing her as a young person who still has dreams beyond the gym walls. Fact number 54. Misty's Pokemon in the games shifted considerably across generations. In the original Red and Blue, she used Staryu and Starmie. By the time of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, her team had grown to include Golduck, Quagsire, Lapras, Starmie, and a Gyarados. The inclusion of Gyarados on her team in the remakes was a significant detail, given that the anime had spent multiple episodes on the story of Misty overcoming her childhood fear of Gyarados to eventually tame one. Fact number 55. In Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee, Misty's theme was updated with a fresh arrangement, and her overworld sprite showed her at the poolside of her gym with an expression of genuine confidence rather than the competitive aggression of earlier designs. But the visual language communicated something about how the character had grown over decades of the franchise. Section 5. Suicune and the Burned Tower. The legendary beasts of Johto are 3 of the most lore-rich Pokemon in the franchise. And of the 3, Suicune, the water type, has consistently been given the most prominence across the games and media. Fact number 56. The origin story of the legendary beasts begins with a building. The brass tower in Ecruteak City, called the Tin Tower in some translations, burned down 150 years before the events of Gold and Silver. A lightning bolt struck the tower, starting a fire that burned out of control. The fire eventually died in a sudden downpour of rain. 3 unnamed Pokémon were inside the tower when it burned, and they did not survive. When the sun rose the morning after the fire, Ho-Oh appeared from the sky, and using its power over resurrection, it brought the 3 Pokémon back to life. They were reborn as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, each embodying one element of the disaster. Raikou is the lightning that started the fire. Entei is the fire itself. Suicune is the rain that ended it. Fact number 57. The debate about whether the legendary beasts are dogs or cats has technically been settled. The manga artist Muneo Saito, who was responsible for their original designs, confirmed in interviews that all 3 were inspired by felines, not canines. Entei was based on a lion, Raikou drew from a tiger, and Suicune's inspiration came from jungle cats such as leopards and panthers. The popular designation of the legendary dogs emerged from the fan community in the Western market, likely because the creatures were assigned the same overworld sprite as Growlithe, which is clearly a dog, in the original Gold and Silver games. The confusion was born from a technical shortcut in the game's code, and it stuck with the franchise for decades despite being factually incorrect. Fact number 58. Suicune, uniquely among the 3 legendary beasts, was given its own standalone starring role in Pokémon Crystal, the 3rd version for the Johto games. In that game, Suicune didn't roam freely. Instead, it followed the player across the region, appearing at specific locations and fleeing each time, until a final confrontation at the Tin Tower. This gave Crystal's legendary encounter a quality of being pursued by something ancient and evaluating, as if Suicune was deciding whether the player was worthy of catching it rather than simply being a wild creature to be hunted. Fact number 59. There is a beautiful fan theory, supported by considerable visual and mechanical evidence, suggesting that the 3 Pokémon who died in the Brass Tower were originally Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. The type correspondences are exact. Raikou and Jolteon are both yellow electric types. Entei and Flareon are both red fire types. Suicune and Vaporeon are both blue water types. Beyond typing, both trios have similar stat distributions, with Raikou and Jolteon both prioritizing speed and special attack, and Vaporeon and Suicune both being built around sustained defensive capability with high HP and special defense. Additionally, after the hidden abilities introduced for the legendary beasts in Generation 5, Volt Absorb for Raikou, Flash Fire for Entei, and Water Absorb for Suicune, mirror exactly the standard abilities of Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. Game Freak has never confirmed or denied this theory. Fact number 60. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, one of the legendary beasts roams the Kanto region after the player returns post-game, and which beast appears is determined by which starter the player chose at the beginning. Players who chose Squirtle, a water type, encounter Raikou. Players who chose Bulbasaur encounter Entei. Players who chose Charmander encounter Suicune. The assignment is based on type advantage, meaning each player faces the legendary beast that is super effective against their starter. Suicune appears for Charmander players because water beats fire. Fact number 61. Suicune's Pokédex entries describe it as the North Wind given physical form. It is said to purify water sources as it travels, turning murky and poisoned water into something clean and drinkable. It runs at astonishing speed and is associated with clear blue skies and crisp, cold air. In the anime special Pokémon Forever, Suicune's appearance is depicted as an event of genuine natural wonder, something between a meteorological phenomenon and a visitation. The creature moves silently across the surface of water and doesn't disturb it. Fact number 62. Suicune's signature move, Sacred Fire, is technically shared with Ho-Oh. Suicune's actual signature move in competitive play is Aurora Veil, had a status move that Suicune could set up using its high special defense to create a screen, protecting both physical and special attacks simultaneously. In competitive doubles, Suicune running Aurora Veil alongside Hail became a genuinely powerful strategy for several generations, allowing teammates to benefit from full protection while Suicune weathered attacks. Fact number 63. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Suicune received a paradox counterpart called Walking Wake, described in an old book discovered within the game as a creature seen in the ancient past that resembled Suicune but more serpentine and feral. Walking Wake was a water and dragon type, representing a vision of what Suicune might have been like before the legendary beasts as we know them were shaped by Ho-Oh's resurrection. The name Walking Wake is poetic in a way that suits the creature perfectly. Water that moves of its own volition. Rain that doesn't wait. Section 6. Kyogre and the Primal Sea. If Suicune is the water type made personal and mythological, Kyogre is the water type made ahamic. Fact number 64. Kyogre is based on the Leviathan, the great sea monster of Hebrew myth and certain strands of Christian mythology. In the Book of Job, the Leviathan is described as a creature that cannot be restrained, that breathes fire and smoke, and that rules the deep waters as an embodiment of primal chaos. Kyogre doesn't breathe fire, obviously, but its thematic identity as an ancient, inconceivably powerful force associated with water, creation, and destruction maps onto the Leviathan archetype almost perfectly. Fact number 65. Kyogre created the oceans. According to the lore established in the Ruby and Sapphire games and expanded in Omega, Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Kyogre and Groudon existed in the ancient world before the Hoenn region itself existed. Kyogre expanded the oceans. Groudon expanded the landmasses. Their battles shaped the geography of the world. This is creation mythology embedded within a handheld game about collecting cartoon animals, and the writers committed to it completely. Fact number 66. The red and blue orbs, the items used to awaken Kyogre and Groudon in the games, were originally created by the ancient Draconid people of Hoenn. The Draconids were a tribe of dragon-type Pokémon users who observed the ancient conflict and recognized that it couldn't go on forever. They created the orbs as tools to summon Rayquaza, the only force capable of calming both Kyogre and Groudon. The Sky Pillar, a towering structure in Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, was built by the Draconids specifically as a monument to Rayquaza's role as peacekeeper. Fact number 67. In Pokémon Ruby, the evil team was Team Magma, who wanted to expand the landmass. In Pokémon Sapphire, it was Team Aqua, who wanted to expand the oceans. Many players and critics over the years have noted that the conflict between these teams mirrors a very specific real-world event from Japanese history. The Isahaya Bay Reclamation Project, a major infrastructure effort in Japan in the late 1990s, involved altering coastal geography to create more agricultural land at the expense of the existing marine ecosystem. The project triggered massive environmental protests, particularly from fishing communities and environmental groups. The timing aligns perfectly with the development of Ruby and Sapphire and the thematic overlap. A conflict over whether more land or more water serves humanity better has led many observers to conclude that Ruby and Sapphire were at least partially inspired by that political and ecological debate. Fact number 68. Primal Kyogre, the form it takes when holding the blue orb in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, has a base stat total of 770, making it the highest of any water-type Pokémon in existence. Its ability, Primordial Sea, creates a permanent heavy rain that causes every water-type move to deal 50% more damage and makes fire-type moves completely unusable. Under Primordial Sea, trying to use a fire-type move does not cause it to fail. The move is simply absorbed into the overwhelming rain and nothing happens. Fact number 69. Kyogre's visual design features glowing red marking lines on its body that resemble flowing water channels or the patterns one might see in cracked earth. When it takes its primal form, these markings expand dramatically, and its overall color scheme deepens into a rich royal blue with golden and white accents. The transformation is visually remarkable. Primal Kyogre looks like something that could genuinely end the world. Fact number 70. The stripes and markings on Kyogre's primal form, when viewed closely, form the shape of a lowercase alpha letter. Similarly, primal Groudon's markings form the shape of an omega, and Mega Rayquaza has a delta symbol on its forehead. Alpha, omega, delta. Beginning, end, change. That the symbolism is deliberate and operates entirely below the surface of the game, invisible to most players, a piece of quiet mythological layering that reveals itself only when you sit down and look. Fact number 71. Kyogre cannot learn Surf in any traditional way in the games. For a Pokemon whose entire identity is the expansion of the world's oceans, this is a quietly charming irony. Fact number 72. In Pokemon Go, Kyogre's introduction as a raid boss in January 2018 briefly dominated weather, with players in cold climates benefiting from in-game rain bonuses tied to real-world weather integration that the app had introduced. The idea of tracking real weather to enhance battles with a Pokemon representing the primal ocean felt like the game acknowledging its own mythological weight. Fact number 73. Team Aqua's stated goal, to expand the ocean in honor of Kyogre, was actually counterproductive even within the game's own logic. If Kyogre's power was unleashed and the oceans expanded enough to cover the land, it wouldn't create a world that supported aquatic life better. It would destroy the ecological balance that allowed any life to thrive at all. Team Aqua was, at its core, a group of people so in love with the ocean that they were prepared to destroy the world for it. Their fanaticism was the point. Even well-meaning convictions, when taken to their extreme, can become catastrophic. Section 7. Water-type moves. From Splash to Origin Pulse. Water-type moves are among the most varied and mechanically interesting category of attacks in the game. There are 53 water-type moves as of Generation 9, which ties it with Dark-type as the fifth most common type for moves. Fact number 74. Surf is one of the oldest and most iconic moves in the franchise. It existed in Generation 1 as both a field move, allowing players to travel over water on the world map, and as a battle move. In battle, Surf hits all adjacent Pokemon in a double battle, which for many years made it simultaneously one of the best offensive moves and one of the most dangerous to use carelessly in doubles format. The animation of Surf in the original games, a simple but evocative blue wave washing across the screen, is one of the most nostalgic images in Pokemon history for a generation of players who navigated through the game's ocean routes with it. Fact number 75. Hydro Pump is the signature high-power water move of the franchise. It has 110 base power with 80% accuracy, making it the go-to finishing move for special attacking water types. The move's power is enough to eliminate or cripple almost any Pokemon that doesn't resist it, and under Rain, with a water-type Pokemon and the Torrent ability activating simultaneously, a single Hydro Pump can reach damage levels that are almost comically high. Fact number 76. Origin Pulse is Kyogre's signature move and the most powerful water-type move in the game. It has 110 base power and 85% accuracy, hitting all opponents in doubles battles. Unlike most powerful moves, Origin Pulse represents Kyogre's ability to call upon ancient oceanic energy rather than simply firing a beam of water. The animation is abstract and swirling, resembling the visual language of deep water rather than a simple jet or wave. Fact number 77. Rain Dance, the move that creates rain for 5 turns, was introduced in Generation 2. For the entirety of competitive Pokemon's history, Rain Dance has been one of the most important strategic moves in the game, enabling entire team archetypes built around exploiting the weather. Rain teams, which centered on a Pokemon that could set rain and then bring out fast, hard-hitting water types to take advantage of the 50% damage bonus, were a dominant force in competitive play for years. Fact number 78. Scald, introduced in Generation 5, is one of the most distinctive moves in water type's history. It has 80 base power and a 30% chance to inflict a burn on the target. The burn chance from Scald is remarkably high, and because Scald is a special move, and it can be used by the same Pokemon that typically can't threaten physical damage. In competitive play, Scald became the dominant water-type move for defensive and bulky water types precisely because the burn chance softened physical attackers significantly. It was banned from certain competitive formats for being too broadly powerful. Fact number 79. Waterfall is the physical equivalent of Surf. It was originally only a field move in Generation 1 and 2, used to climb waterfalls in the overworld. It was eventually given its combat form, becoming an 80 base power physical water type move with a 20% flinch chance. The flinch chance is low but real, and in fast Pokemon, the threat of a waterfall flinch becomes part of the psychological pressure of the battle. Fact number 80. Aqua Jet is Water type's priority move. It has 40 base power and always moves first. Priority moves are essential for finishing off fast opponents that would otherwise move first and knock out your Pokemon. Aqua Jet made a significant difference for physical attacking water types, like Azumarill, which has comparatively low speed but enormous attack power, allowing it to use Aqua Jet to pick off weakened opponents before they could react. Fact number 81. The move Soak, introduced in Generation 5, transforms any target into a pure water type. This has very niche but genuinely interesting applications. If you soak a Pokemon that is immune to water-type moves, like a Dry Skin or Water-Absorb Pokemon, its immunity is removed and it can now be hit by water moves. If you soak a Pokemon of a type with numerous resistances, those resistances disappear entirely. As in competitive doubles, Soak has been used in creative combination strategies to enable moves like Brine or Z moves to deal unexpected super effective damage. Fact number 82. Brine, introduced in Generation 4, doubles in power when the target has less than half their HP remaining. Its base power is 65, which becomes 130 when the target is weakened. This makes Brine an exceptional finishing move, particularly against bulky Pokemon that have been slowly worn down. The move has a visual animation showing a concentrated blast of salt water. Fact number 83. Liquidation, introduced in Generation 7, is a physical water-type move with 85 base power and a 20% chance to lower the target's defense. And it effectively replaced Waterfall as the preferred physical water-type attack for many competitive Pokemon because of the stat-lowering effect's additional strategic value. Fact number 84. Water Shuriken, Greninja's signature move, has 15 base power but hits 2 to 5 times per use, effectively averaging around 56.25 base power. However, what makes it unique is that it is a water-type priority move that uses the special attack stat. This made Greninja's Water Shuriken essentially the fastest and most precise form of chip damage in the game, capable of breaking focus sashes and finishing weakened targets before they could react. Fact number 85. The move Dive, originally introduced as a field move allowing players to submerge underwater in certain locations, became a battle move in Generation 3. As a battle move, Dive takes 2 turns. The first turn, the Pokemon submerges. The second turn, it rises and strikes. While the Pokemon is submerged, most moves cannot hit it, which gives it a form of pseudo-invincibility during the charge turn. Fact number 86. Weather Ball becomes a water-type move under Rain, which gives certain Pokemon that can learn Weather Ball access to a water attack even if they are not water-type at all. Cast Form, the little cloud-like Pokemon whose entire design revolves around weather, actually changes into its rainy form during rain, becoming a water-type temporarily. The combination of being water-type and using a water-type Weather Ball under Rain gives Cast Form an enormous power spike in its preferred conditions. Section 8. The Deep Cuts. Obscure water-type Pokemon. Beyond the stars of the franchise lie dozens of water-type Pokemon with stories that rarely get told at full length. Fact number 87. Lapras is based partly on plesiosaurs, the long-extinct aquatic reptiles that dominated the oceans during the age of dinosaurs, and partly on the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. Plesiosaurs had long necks, small heads, and large paddle-like flippers, which is essentially Lapras. The Loch Ness Monster, particularly in the famous photograph taken by Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson in 1934, which was later proven to be a hoax, was depicted as a plesiosaur surfacing from dark water. When Lapras surfs, its silhouette from the side is almost identical to that famous fake photograph, which is almost certainly intentional. Fact number 88. Lapras was treated in the games as a deliberately rare and precious Pokemon. In the original Red and Blue, there was exactly 1 Lapras in the entire game, given to the player as a gift from an employee in the Sylph Company building. There were no wild Lapras to be found. This singular nature gave it a cherished quality that has persisted. Lapras was always something you received, not something you caught. Fact number 89. Vaporeon is the water-type evolution and was introduced alongside Jolteon and Flareon as the original 3 possible evolutions from Eevee. Vaporeon evolves when Eevee is exposed to a water stone. Its design represents a blend of aquatic features, with a tail like a fish, frills resembling a mane, and a body that is said to have a cellular structure similar to water molecules, making it capable of melting into water so completely that it becomes indistinguishable from it. Fact number 90. Vaporeon has the highest base HP of all evolutions. It sits at 130 base HP, which combined with its 110 special defense and passable defense makes it surprisingly durable. In competitive play across multiple generations, Vaporeon served as a reliable wall that could absorb special hits, restore HP with Wish, and pass the Wish to teammates through the Wish Pass strategy. It was never a top-tier threat, but was consistent, reliable, and effective at exactly what it was designed to do. Fact number 91. In Pokemon Yellow, Vaporeon was actually programmed to learn both Haze and Mist at the same level, level 42. However, a bug in the game's code prevented a Pokemon from learning more than one move at the same level when leveled up normally outside of battle. Pokemon Yellow never patched this, meaning Vaporeon players in Yellow missed out on one of those moves unless they used very specific methods. Fact number 92. Melodic, introduced in Generation 3, was designed as a counterpart and visual response to Phoebus, which was deliberately created to be the ugly fish that required maximum effort to evolve. Phoebus is based on a blobfish crossed with a roughed-up, ugly carp, and in the games it could be found only in certain tiles on a specific route, and only if the player checked specific water tiles with a rod. To evolve it into Melodic required raising its Beauty Contest stat to maximum in Generation 3. It later changed to Maximum Friendship in Generation 8. The evolution from Phoebus into Melodic was the game's version of the ugly duckling becoming a swan. Melodic itself is one of the most visually elegant Pokemon in the franchise. A long white and pink sea serpent with flowing tendrils of rainbow-tinted scale that evokes traditional East Asian depictions of benevolent dragon spirits. Fact number 93. Golduck is frequently confused for a Psyduck evolution when it comes to type identity, but Golduck is a pure water type, while Psyduck is also water, but given psychic-flavored abilities due to the chronic headaches that power its psychic bursts. In the original games, Golduck's design was considered sleek and cool enough that many players preferred it aesthetically to the more recognizable Psyduck, even though Psyduck had the more distinctive personality. Fact number 94. Politoed, the alternate final evolution of Poliwag's line, was introduced in Generation 2 alongside Slowking as one of the water-type evolutions that required a trade while holding a specific item, in this case the King's Rock. Politoed became notable in competitive play in Generation 5 when Drizzle, the ability to set permanent rain upon entry, was given to it as a non-legendary option for the first time. This enabled rain teams that didn't require a legendary Pokemon to set up their weather, and Politoed's role as a rain setter became one of the most strategically important niches in competitive doubles and singles for years. Fact number 95. Corsola, the small pink coral Pokemon from Generation 2, gained a new Galarian form in Generation 8. Galarian Corsola is a ghost type rather than a water and rock type, and its Pokédex entries describe it as the bleached and dead remains of the original colorful Corsola, which died due to ocean temperature changes. It's one of the most direct pieces of environmental commentary in franchise history, explicitly depicting coral bleaching, which is a real phenomenon in which warming ocean temperatures cause coral reefs to lose their color and die. The Galarian Corsola and its evolution Cursola are mournful by design, their pale, ghostly forms clearly representing something that was once alive and vibrant and is now simply gone. Fact number 96. Wailord is the largest Pokemon in the franchise by length. It measures 14.5 meters, roughly 47 feet 7 inches long, which is approximately the height of a 5-story building. Its weight, paradoxically, is quite low relative to its size. At 398 kilograms, or 877.4 pounds, Wailord has an extremely low density, which is lore-consistent because it is based on a balanopterid whale, a filter-feeding whale like the blue whale. And real large whales actually have lower density than many smaller animals due to their blubber and bone structure. Wailord can dive to 10,000 feet on a single breath. Fact number 97. To unlock the sealed chamber in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which in turn unlocks the Regi legendary trio Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, the player must arrive at the chamber with both a Wailord and a Relicanth at the front of their party. A Wailord, the largest Pokemon, and a Relicanth, a living fossil. Yet the combination suggested something ancient being opened by both the depths of the ocean and the earliest surviving creature from that time. It was one of the most cryptic puzzles in the franchise and was solved collaboratively by players comparing notes online in the early 2000s. Fact number 98. Wishiwashi is one of the most mechanically unique Pokemon in the franchise. In its solo form, it is among the weakest Pokemon ever created, with a base stat total of only 175 and individual stats that make Magikarp look threatening by comparison. But when Wishiwashi reaches level 20 and enters battle with more than 25% of its HP remaining, its schooling ability triggers assembling dozens of tiny Wishiwashi into a massive school formation that functions as a single enormous fish with a combined base stat total of 600 by 620. Show fact number 99. The stat difference between Wishiwashi's solo form and school form is the largest of any form change in the game. Going from a base stat total of 175 to 620 is an increase of 445 stat points, which is staggering. For context, the difference between Magikarp and Gyarados in base stat totals is 460 points. Wishiwashi essentially evolves without evolving, becoming something terrifying through collective action rather than individual transformation. Fact number 100. Wishiwashi's Alola Pokédex entries describe it as the demon of the sea, feared near and far by other ocean dwellers. Even Gyarados, described elsewhere as a force of pure destruction, will flee from a school of Wishiwashi. The contrast between solo form Wishiwashi, which is an anxious little fish that cries when threatened, and school form Wishiwashi, which is the apex predator of Alolan waters, is the most dramatic personality dichotomy in the franchise. Fact number 101. Clamperl has two possible evolutionary paths, Huntail and Gorbis. Which one it evolves into depends on which item it holds when traded. A deep sea tooth produces Huntail, a deep sea scale produces Gorbis. Both are found deep in the ocean, both are designed as genuinely unsettling creatures. Huntail is a deep sea anglerfish equivalent, with bioluminescent lure and a body designed for the crushing darkness of the ocean floor. Gorbis is a pink, tube-like creature that looks delicate and beautiful, but whose Pokédex entries describe it as feeding by inserting its thin proboscis into prey and draining the life out of them. Pokemon games have always been willing to let beautiful things be secretly horrifying. Fact number 102. Luvdisc is considered by many players as one of the weakest Pokemon in competitive terms, with a base stat total of only 330 and no evolutionary path. Its Pokédex entries are consistently romantic, describing it as a Pokemon that appears in warm ocean waters when couples swim together and whose heart-shaped body is said to bring eternal love. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Luvdisc is the primary source for the Heart Scale item, and players would spend significant time finding and defeating Luvdiscs just to collect these items for the Move Reminder service. A creature whose entire lore is about love became largely associated with being farmed for resources. Section 9, Water in the Anime. From the Cerulean Gym to the Ocean's Edge. Fact number 103. The first gym battle in the Pokemon anime involving a water-type gym was not Misty's gym. In the narrative of the show, Ash's first gym battle was at Pewter City against Brock, a rock-type specialist. Misty came second, but the storytelling chose to introduce Misty before her own gym, weaving her into the journey before establishing her authority as a gym leader, which created a slightly different dynamic than the games presented. Fact number 104. Wallace, the water-type specialist who serves as both a gym leader and later the champion of the Hun region, is one of the most aesthetically distinct characters in the franchise. He dresses in a flowing cape and elaborate hat, but carries himself with the bearing of a theatrical performer, and is described as the most celebrated and beloved coordinator in the world. His transition from gym leader to champion happened because Pokemon Emerald needed to differentiate itself from Ruby and Sapphire, and making Steven Stone step down in favor of Wallace was one of the ways it did so. In Ruby and Sapphire, the final gym leader is Juan, Wallace's former teacher. Wallace took over the champion position. Fact number 105. Crasher Wake of Sinnoh is one of the most visually striking gym leaders in the franchise. He wears a wrestling mask and has the presence of an enormous professional wrestler despite being a water-type specialist. His gym in Pastoria City is filled with actual marsh water, and he uses Pokemon like Gyarados and Floatzel in his team. On the visual contrast between his professional wrestling aesthetic and the typical gentle associations of water type was clearly intentional, designed to subvert expectations. Fact number 106. Nessa, the water-type gym leader of Galar in Sword and Shield, became one of the most discussed gym leaders at the time of the game's release. Her gym challenge involved navigating floodgates and water locks in a stadium, and she used a team featuring Golisopod, Arrokuda, and her signature Dreadnought. Beyond the games, she had an enormous cultural impact within the fanbase, particularly in online fan communities. Fact number 107. Lana, the water-type trial captain of Alola in Sun and Moon, is a quietly written character whose trial involved battling a school of wishy-washy. And her story in the games touches on themes of the ocean as a place of danger as well as wonder. And her interactions with Ash in the Sun and Moon anime gave her some genuinely sweet moments, centered on her love of fishing and her desire to catch a legendary sea creature. Fact number 108. The World Cup, an anime-exclusive water-type Pokémon tournament held in the Whirl Islands of Johto, gave Misty a chance to shine as a competitor in her own right during the Gold and Silver arc. She made it to the top 8 before narrowly losing, which was framed as a genuine achievement rather than a consolation. The tournament showcased multiple water-type specialists from around the Johto region and gave the audience a sense of how much depth existed in the world's water training community. Fact number 109. In the anime, the ocean routes between regions are depicted as genuinely vast and hazardous. The journey from Kanto to the Orange Islands, from Kanto to Johto, and from Johto to Hoenn all involve extended sea travel. And the stories told during those journeys often featured encounters with wild water-type Pokémon that gave the ocean an atmosphere of genuine mystery and scale. Fact number 110. Brock, who is a rock-type specialist in the games, owned several water-type Pokémon during his time as a traveling companion. He had Marshtomp for a period, and he used Pokémon with water-adjacent typings like Corsola and various others. The show treated water-type Pokémon as broadly accessible regardless of specialization, which reflected the reality that in the games, nearly every trainer in coastal or ocean-adjacent areas would have at least one water type. Fact number 111. Team Aqua in the Pokémon anime adaptation of Ruby and Sapphire was handled with more nuance than the games might suggest. In the games, Team Aqua is straightforwardly villainous, willing to expand the ocean even at the cost of human civilization. The anime versions of their members were occasionally given moments of genuine belief in their cause, showing individuals who truly thought they were doing something beneficial for the ocean and the creatures who lived in it. Fact number 112. The Pokémon anime visited Shamudi Island and the Sea Temple in the second film, Pokémon the Movie 2000. That's which remains one of the franchise's most beloved films in large part because of its ocean setting and its story about the legendary birds in Lugia, the guardian of the sea. The film was one of the first to make the ocean itself feel like a character, with storm systems and tidal waves responding to the conflict between the three legendary birds in Lugia with the weight of genuine natural catastrophe. Fact number 113. Lugia is not technically a water-type Pokémon. It's psychic and flying. However, it is consistently described as the guardian of the seas and lives in the ocean's depths. And in the anime, it is almost always associated with water visually and thematically. In the Pokémon trading card game, Lugia was classified as a water-type card during the Heart Gold and Soul Silver era, reflecting how the card game sometimes prioritized thematic identity over strict type accuracy. Section 10, the final facts. Water's Edge. We're coming to the end of the ocean now. Let's slow down and drift through the last pieces. Fact number 114. Psyduck's relationship with water is complicated. It's a water type, but its most famous characteristic is its chronic headache, which when intense enough, triggers powerful psychic energy. The games and anime have always presented Psyduck as a Pokémon genuinely distressed by its own nature, unable to control when or how its powers manifest, plagued by a headache that never fully goes away. Misty's Psyduck in the anime became a recurring source of comedy precisely because it would come out of its Pokeball at random, usually at the worst possible moment, and then stand there holding its head looking confused. Fact number 115. Slowpoke, and by extension, Slowbro and Slowking, represents one of the more philosophically interesting corners of water-type design. Slowpoke's Pokédex entries describe a creature so slow-witted and relaxed that it often fails to notice pain. When a Shelder bites down on a Slowpoke's tail, the reaction takes several seconds to reach Slowpoke's brain. By the time the pain signal arrives, Slowpoke has already forgotten what was happening. Slowbro occurs when Slowpoke eventually registers the bite and the Shelder has become lodged, with a strange symbiotic relationship developing. The Pokédex describes Slowbro as lost in thought at all times, tasting something sweet from the Shelder's influence. Fact number 116. Politoed's cry in the games, a loud and distinctive ribbiting sound, was designed as a reference to how frogs in folklore are associated with rain. In Japan particularly, frogs are considered harbingers of rain, and a frog singing is often treated as a sign that water is coming. Politoed's ability to summon rain with drizzle is the mechanical expression of this folklore connection. Fact number 117. Corfish, the lobster Pokémon introduced in Generation 3, has Pokédex entries that note it is an extremely invasive species, eating anything it can find and surviving in conditions that would kill most aquatic life. It adapts to pollution, temperature changes, and food scarcity with equal ease. Corfish is quietly one of the most biologically accurate Pokémon in the franchise, not because invasive crayfish species are genuinely one of the most significant ecological problems in freshwater ecosystems around the world. Fact number 118. Clawitzer, the large-clawed Pokémon from Generation 6, fires water from its claw with enough force to create actual shockwaves. The move Crab Hammer, which Clawitzer can use, is one of the harder-hitting physical water-type moves, and is based on the mantis shrimp's famous strike, which can move at speeds fast enough to superheat the water around it and create a cavitation bubble. Real mantis shrimp punches are among the most violent biological actions per unit weight in the animal kingdom. Fact number 119. Phoebus's location in the original Ruby and Sapphire was so obscure that it was commonly listed as one of the hardest single Pokémon to find in franchise history. It could only be caught by fishing with a rod in specific water tiles on Route 119, which was a long fishing route. However, every day the game's internal clock changed, which 6 tiles out of 447 water tiles contained Phoebus. Without guides or knowledge of the current tiles, a player could fish for hours in the wrong spot. Thousands of players across the world spent enormous amounts of time searching for Phoebus, turning its capture into a minor rite of passage. Fact number 120, Relicanth, introduced in Generation 3, is based on the coelacanth, a fish species that was long believed to be extinct, known only from fossils, until a living specimen was discovered off the coast of South Africa in 1938. The coelacanth is one of the most dramatic real-world examples of a living fossil, a creature unchanged from its prehistoric form, and Relicanth captures this by being a pure aquatic Pokémon with ancient rock-based appearances. In the Pokédex, it is described as having remained unchanged for 100 million years. Fact number 121. The Pokémon Gorbis was named based on a reference to the creature's appearance, with its pink, slim, tube-like body suggesting something graceful and beautiful, and the suffix bis evoking abyss. It lives in the deepest parts of the ocean and is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The contrast between its delicate pink appearance and its predatory feeding method is entirely intentional. Fact number 122. Huntail, Gorbis's counterpart, was based on the barrel-eye fish and certain types of deep-sea anglerfish. It lures prey with the ball-shaped tail feature that functions like a light in the darkness of the deep ocean. The deep sea has always provided Game Freak with particularly rich design material because the real creatures of the deep ocean are stranger than almost anything imagination could produce independently. Fact number 123. Dragalge, a water and dragon-type Pokémon introduced in Generation 6, is based on the leafy sea dragon, one of the most visually spectacular real-world fish. Its ragged, seaweed-like body allows it to blend into kelp forests, and its Pokédex entries note that it lurks in the water, waiting for ships to pass over it before unleashing its venom. It is one of the few water-type Pokémon described as genuinely dangerous to humans, rather than simply powerful in battle. Fact number 124. Delmise, the anchor Pokémon introduced in Generation 7, is technically classified as a ghost and grass type, not water type. However, it lives in the ocean, appears during fishing, and its entire design is built around the imagery of sunken ships and the things that grow on them. It represents the part of the ocean that belongs to memory, the rusted anchors and barnacle-covered wreckage sitting in the dark water far below the surface. Fact number 125. Manaphy, the mythical water type. Pokémon that serves as the main character of Pokémon Ranger in the Temple of the Sea has the unique ability to link with other Pokémon and exchange hearts with them, temporarily allowing them to see through each other's experiences. Its relationship with the ocean is described as so deep that it can communicate with water itself. Manaphy can breed with Ditto to produce Phione, which is the only mythical Pokémon capable of reproducing. Phione cannot evolve into Manaphy, making it one of the stranger biological arrangements in the franchise. Fact number 126. Palafin, introduced in Generation 9, is one of the most dramatically designed Pokémon of recent years. It evolves from Finizen and in its base form looks almost identical to it, a plain blue dolphin that barely distinguishes itself. But when it leaves the player's party in a Union Circle group and returns, it undergoes an aesthetic transformation into Palafin hero form, with a powerful build, a heroic flowing white cape, and a look of determined purpose. Its Pokédex entries describe it as a dolphin, who has been watching over humans for years and finally stepped forward to become a hero. Its base stat total in hero form sits at 650. Fact number 127. Dondozo and Tatsugiri, introduced together in Generation 9, form one of the most unusual symbiotic Pokémon designs in franchise history. Tatsugiri, a small sushi-like dragon-type Pokémon, hides inside Dondozo's mouth, giving Dondozo's enormous body directions on how to fight. Dondozo itself is a massive water-type catfish, with a base stat total of 530 in total stats that are distributed toward bulk rather than speed. In competitive doubles, the Dondozo and Tatsugiri pairing became immediately dominant because Tatsugiri's ability commander causes Dondozo to receive massive stat boosts the moment the two are paired, turning an already powerful wall into something nearly unkillable. Fact number 128. Bruxish, the water and psychic type Pokémon introduced in Generation 7, is based on the triggerfish and is designed with an almost confrontational aesthetic. Its mouth is massive, its teeth are enormous, and its color scheme is aggressively bright against the ocean environment. Its ability, Dazzling, prevents priority moves from working against it, making it impossible to finish off with moves like Aqua Jet or Sucker Punch. This makes Bruxish deceptively dangerous, despite its bizarre appearance. Fact number 129. Alomomola. Now, the pink heart-shaped Pokémon from Generation 5 is frequently assumed to evolve from Love Disc because both are heart-shaped, pink, and water type. They have no evolutionary connection. Alomomola is completely separate and apparently unrelated to Love Disc despite the visual similarities. Game Freak has maintained this ambiguity intentionally, and the two Pokémon share no biological connection in the Pokédex entries despite the shared design language. Fact number 130. Pyukumuku from Alola is based on a sea cucumber and is notable for having no offensive moves to speak of, but its ability Innards Out causes it to deal damage equal to its remaining HP when it faints. This turns Pyukumuku into a unique defensive bomb that takes significant punishment, then deals a final burst of damage upon being knocked out. The move Baton Pass combined with the substitute technique and Pyukumuku's absurd stall capabilities made it an irritating presence in certain competitive formats. Fact number 131. Volcanion, the fire and water type mythical Pokémon introduced in Generation 6, was the Pokémon whose introduction completed the water type's record of having been paired with every other type at least once. It generates steam by combining the fire raging inside its body with the water it expels. The visual representation of Steam, a water-fire Pokémon that breathes neither fire nor water, but a combination of both, is a genuinely clever design that takes the type pairing's inherent tension and makes it visually literal. Fact number 132, Urshifu's Rapid Strike style. Introduced in Generation 8 as a fighting and water type, was a deliberate attempt to create a water-type legendary fighter built around precision and philosophy. Its signature move, Surging Strikes, always lands a critical hit, hits 3 times, and bypasses abilities that would otherwise block critical hits. The move is described in its flavor text as a style of combat that mirrors the flowing inevitability of water, finding the path of least resistance through any obstacle. Fact number 133. The Pokemon Primarina, the final form of Poplio, sings to create and control water balloons, shaping them into spheres, bubbles, and weapons using the power of its voice. It is described as a virtuoso singer whose vocal control is precise enough to maintain and direct multiple water constructs simultaneously. Yet its high special attack stat of 126 reflects the sheer power of what it's doing sonically and hydrokinetically. The image of a sea lion performing in a bubble-filled arena while conducting a water orchestra is one of the more purely beautiful design concepts in the franchise's history. Fact number 134. Walrein, the final evolution of Spheal, has Pokédex entries that describe it as able to shatter ice flows with a single tackle. The way its tusks develop across the evolutionary line, from Spheal's round, tusk-free body through Cialio into Walrein, mirrors real-world walrus development. Spheal itself became a fan favorite for being almost pathologically round, and Spheal's animated sprite in the games was noted as one of the most cheerful in the franchise. Fact number 135. But Sharpedo is based on the short-fin Mako shark and the torpedo. Its name combines shark and torpedo. It can swim at speeds of 75 miles per hour by expelling jet propulsion from the back openings in its body. Its Pokédex entries describe it as the gangster of the sea, which is a rare example of Pokémon leaning into a frankly cinematic piece of creature mythology. Mega Sharpedo gained a speed stat of 105 alongside boosted offenses, making it one of the fastest physical attackers available to water-type teams during the generation where Mega Evolutions were allowed. Fact number 136. Huntail and Gorbis's evolutions, determined by held item during trade, represent a rare case of a single Pokémon line branching into 2 entirely different directions with no way to reverse the choice once made. The items required. The Deep Sea Tooth and the Deep Sea Scale also doubled as stat-boosting held items for Clamperl itself before evolution, giving players a reason to use Clamperl in battle even before evolving it. Fact number 137. The water type in the Pokémon trading card game covers both water-type Pokémon from the video games and all ice-type Pokémon, since the card game has historically operated with a simplified type system. This means that cards like Articuno, Lapras, and Glaceon are classified as water type in the TCG, regardless of what the main series games say about them. The card game's water type symbol uses a blue raindrop, which has been the visual identity of water type cards since the base set in 1998. Fact number 138. In the Pokemon TCG, Blastoise's Rain Dance ability from the original base set in 1996 was the first major energy acceleration ability ever printed on a card. Rain Dance allowed the player to attach as many water energy cards as they wanted per turn, bypassing the 1 energy per turn rule that governed everything else. This single ability created the first true combo-based archetype in the game's history, and set a precedent for the kind of powerful engine building that the TCG would spend the next 30 years exploring. Fact number 139. The red Gyarados in the Lake of Rage in Pokemon Gold and Silver, later Heart Gold and Soul Silver, is one of the franchise's most iconic moments. You can see its red scales from the water's surface before you even engage it. It exists because of Team Rocket's signal broadcast forcing rapid evolution on Pokemon in the area, which had the effect of producing a Gyarados of an unusual color. The red Gyarados is shiny, and it was many players' first encounter with a shiny Pokemon, making it a moment of collective discovery that a generation of players remembers vividly. Fact number 140. Jinx, while not a water type, has a connection to water type history worth mentioning. The design controversy that eventually led Game Freak to change Jinx's skin color from black to purple affected several early anime episodes, including one involving an ice cave with Pokémon including water types. The decision to revisit and revise early content extended even to physical releases, with some DVD versions of early episodes featuring reanimated segments where Jinx appeared. Fact number 141. Seeking is a water-type Pokémon whose Pokédex entries describe it as one of the most aggressive during its spawning season in autumn, when it charges upstream through rapids to reach its spawning grounds. This behavior mirrors real salmon migration, which is one of the most studied and visually dramatic natural phenomena in the Northern Hemisphere. Seeking is partly based on the koi, but draws from salmon for its behavioral characteristics. Fact number 142. Horsea, Seadra, and Kingdra form a line based on seahorses and sea dragons. Horsea's design is simple and cute, barely more than a tiny curled fish. Seadra introduces spines and an intimidating demeanor. Kingdra is dragon type as well as water, having been a Seadra for so long at such depth that it developed dragon characteristics. Its Pokédex entries suggest that when Kingdra wakes from its ocean floor slumber, the suction created by its yawn generates whirlpools powerful enough to capsize fishing boats. Fact number 143. Octillery, the evolved form of Remoraid, is one of the stranger evolutionary lines in the franchise for its visual discontinuity. Remoraid looks like a small fish. Octillery is an octopus. The connection is almost purely thematic, based on the idea of a remora, which is a real fish that attaches itself to larger ocean creatures, growing into something new through that relationship. The name Remoraid combines remora and raid. The name Octillery combines octopus and artillery. Fact number 144. Lantern, the water and electric type Pokémon based on the anglerfish, charges its lure bright enough to be visible from depths over 16,000 feet below the ocean's surface. Its Pokédex entries say the light is so intense that in the darkness of the deep sea, it can be mistaken for a star. There is something about the image of a creature living at the bottom of the ocean radiating a light strong enough to look like a star from above that captures exactly the kind of quiet wonder that water-type Pokémon are at their best at conveying. Fact number 145. The Pokémon Frillish and Jellicent are based on jellyfish and on certain yokai from Japanese folklore. Male Jellicent is based on the Nurarihyun, a traditional spirit associated with mysterious and otherworldly jellyfish figures. Female Jellicent is based on a different aquatic spirit. Their ghost typing reflects how dangerous jellyfish can be in the real world and how many maritime traditions involve legends of dangerous water spirits. Their Pokédex entries note that Jellicent engulfs ships and the people on them in order to feed. Fact number 146. Caracosta, a water and rock type Pokémon fossil from Generation 5, is based on Archelon, the largest turtle ever to have lived, which grew to over 4 meters in length during the Cretaceous period. It is restored from a cover fossil and represents the idea of prehistoric water life brought back through scientific means. Its shell is so hard that it can endure most attacks without damage. Fact number 147. Cramorant is a water and flying type, introduced in Generation 8 based on a cormorant, the diving seabird famous for fishing techniques that involve diving underwater and catching fish in their gullet. Cramorant's ability, Gulp Missile, reflects this behavior directly in battle. When Cramorant uses surf or dive, it emerges with a fish in its mouth. If it is then hit by an attack, it fires the fish at the attacker. The fish it catches varies depending on its health, with a Pikachu being the fish it fires when at low health, which is never explained, and is somehow one of the funniest details in all of Pokémon. Fact number 148. Barraskewda, introduced in Generation 8, has a base speed stat of 136, making it one of the fastest water-type Pokémon in the franchise. It is based on the Barracuda, one of the ocean's fastest predatory fish, and its name combines Barracuda with Skewer and Barrage. In competitive play, Barraskewda with Swift Swim under Rain can reach speed levels that outpace almost everything else in the game. Fact number 149. Arrokuda, Barraskewda's pre-evolution, has a Pokédex entry noting that it charges in a straight line and will crash directly into obstacles without trying to avoid them. The flavor description creates the image of something that is incredibly fast but not terribly smart, which is a genuinely charming character note for a pre-evolution to carry. Fact number 150. The water type's relationship with healing moves is extensive. Water-type Pokémon have access to Aqua Ring, a move that surrounds the user in a veil of water that restores HP each turn. Combined with leftovers and other passive healing mechanisms, Aqua Ring turns certain bulky water-type Pokémon into nearly unkillable entities that could sit on the field and recover continuously while the opponent struggled to deal enough damage to finish them off. Fact number 151. Wiglet and Wugtrio, introduced in Generation 9, are convergent evolved forms that look nearly identical to Diglett and Dugtrio, but are water type rather than ground type. They live in sandy ocean floors and poke up through the sand in groups. The design is a direct acknowledgement of the concept of convergent evolution, the biological phenomenon where unrelated species independently develop similar forms due to similar environmental pressures. Two completely unrelated creatures that ended up looking almost the same. Fact number 152. The move Whirlpool, introduced in Generation 2, traps the target in a vortex of swirling water, preventing them from escaping and dealing damage each turn. It was originally used as a field move in Gold and Silver to access the Whirl Islands, where Lugia was found. Its dual function as both a tool for navigating the world and a combat technique was one of the more elegant uses of a Pokémon move in the franchise's history. Fact number 153. Masquerain is a water type in an unusual way. Its pre-evolution Surskit is a water and bug type, but upon evolving it loses the water typing entirely and becomes bug and flying. This makes Surskit one of the only Pokémon in the franchise to start as a water type and evolve into something that is no longer water type at all. The change mirrors real-world insect biology, where aquatic larval stages evolve into flying adult stages, but it is rare enough in the game to be striking. Fact number 154. Basculin, the striped bass Pokémon introduced in Generation 5, exists in two forms that are almost identical but characterized by different stripe patterns and different ability sets. The red striped form has the Reckless ability, which increases the power of recoil-causing moves. The blue striped form has Rockhead, which prevents recoil damage entirely. The two forms represent different personality archetypes using the same fish body, one reckless and one stoic. Fact number 155. In the Pokémon anime's opening series, the very first glimpse of a water-type Pokémon seen in the wild comes in the first episode itself. But when Ash falls into the river trying to escape the Spearow flock, a Magikarp can briefly be seen swimming beneath the water as he sinks below the surface. It's a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but it means that even in the franchise's very first episode, even before a single Pokémon had been officially encountered, the first wild Pokémon visible on screen was a water type. Fact number 156. Wooper, the blue axolotl-like Pokémon from Generation 2, gained a regional form in Generation 9. Paldean Wooper is poison and ground type rather than water and ground, representing a Wooper whose family moved away from the water long ago and adapted to dry land life, coating itself in a poisonous film to compensate for the loss of the water's protection. It's one of the more emotionally resonant regional forms in the franchise precisely because the Pokédex entries describe the adaptation not as a triumph, but as a response to loss. Fact number 157. The Pokémon Finneon and Luminion are based on butterfly fish and fairy wrasse, two of the most visually spectacular real-world fish found on coral reefs. Their bioluminescent patterns were designed to represent the way certain deep-sea fish generate light for communication and attraction. Luminion, the final form, trails its fins through the water like flowing ribbons, and is described as capable of luring other Pokémon toward it by creating patterns of light. Their rarity and limited utility in competitive play has made them beloved by fans who appreciate beautiful Pokémon that don't need to be powerful. Fact number 158. Keldeo is a water and fighting type mythical Pokémon that is actually based on the Kelpie, a horse spirit from Scottish folklore. Kelpies in traditional myth appear as beautiful lost horses beside rivers, luring travelers onto their backs before charging into the water and drowning them. Keldeo, being a member of the heroic Swords of Justice quartet, alongside Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, takes the water horse imagery and transforms it into something noble, though the Pokemon's original connection to a dangerous water spirit is a detail that makes the history more layered. Fact number 159. Azumarill, the full evolution of Marill, was for many years one of the most underrated Pokemon in competitive play. Its huge power ability doubles its attack stat, taking a base attack of 50 and effectively raising it to a staggering 100. Combined with priority moves like Aqua Jet and the Fairy, typing it gained in Generation 6, Azumarill became a genuine offensive threat capable of destroying Dark, Dragon, and Fighting-type Pokemon before they could react. The transformation of Azumarill from considered minor into a legitimate competitive powerhouse happened gradually over multiple generations and was one of the franchise's most satisfying examples of player discovery. Fact number 160. And the final fact. Water-type Pokemon have been present in every generation, in every region, in every medium. From the first moment Squirtle stood across from you in Professor Oak's lab with that slight, confident smile, unto the first time you saw Kyogre's sleeping form in the depths of the seafloor cavern and understood, even at a young age, that something enormous and ancient and beautiful was about to happen. Water has always been the constant, the undercurrent beneath every adventure, the ocean between every island, the river at the edge of every starting town. There are 162 water-type Pokemon, and each one of them is a story. Each one of them is a dream someone had about the ocean. That's where we're going to rest tonight. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This video took a long time to put together, and knowing you were here for all of it means more than you realize. If you enjoyed this journey through water-type history, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel, as a subscription costs you nothing and helps the channel grow more than almost any other form of support. And there's a lot more coming. More types, more deep dives, more nights exactly like this one. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite water-type Pokemon. I want to know. I read everything. Sleep well. The ocean will be here when you wake up. Extended section. The world beneath the surface. Deeper history and hidden design. The water type's history runs deeper than any single list of facts can capture. Tonight, before we rest, let's drift into some of the quieter, more reflective corners of everything water type represents. Not just in mechanical terms, but in the creative philosophy behind how these Pokemon were made and why they endure. One of the most quietly fascinating things about water-type Pokemon is how frequently their designs are drawn from marine creatures that most of the people playing the games have never seen in person. Unlike ground-type Pokemon, which draw from familiar land animals like snakes and moles and dogs, or fire-type Pokemon, which use immediately recognizable imagery of flames and heat, water-type Pokemon occupy a design space built partly on the unknown. The deep ocean is the last great frontier on Earth. Humans have explored less of the ocean floor than they have of the surface of the moon. And it's from that darkness, that mystery, that Game Freak has been drawing creatures for 30 years. Think about what the anglerfish looked like to the first naturalist who ever saw one brought up from the deep. Had a creature with a bioluminescent lure dangling from its head, a jaw capable of expanding to swallow something larger than itself, and eyes designed for a world without light. It looked like something from a nightmare, and it was entirely real. This is the creative environment water-type Pokemon inhabit. When Lantern's Pokédex says its light can be seen for miles in the darkness, when Huntail lures prey with its glowing tail, when Delmise drifts in the wreck-strewn dark with the anchor it has claimed, these designs are gesturing toward a world most of us will only ever see in photographs and nature documentaries. Water-type Pokemon are also notable for being the type most likely to emphasize transformation. Magikarp to Gyarados is the most dramatic example, but consider the broader pattern. Phoebos, ugly and difficult to find, becomes melodic, one of the most beautiful Pokemon in the franchise. Surskit, a water strider bug larva, becomes Masquerain, an aerial insect. Wishiwashi, the weakest small fish imaginable, becomes the demon of the sea. Horsia becomes Kingdra. The water type is built around the idea that what you see is never quite the whole story, that beneath the surface of the ordinary, something extraordinary is quietly waiting. This is not coincidental. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokémon, was inspired in large part by his childhood hobby of collecting insects and aquatic life near his home in Machida, a city on the outskirts of Tokyo. He described the experience of turning over rocks in shallow streams and finding things he couldn't identify, creatures that looked strange and alien, as foundational to his understanding of what discovery felt like. Now, the sense of something more always existing beneath the surface of the world was baked into Pokémon from its earliest conception, and Water type, more than any other, carries that original vision. To wade into a body of water in a Pokémon game and find something you weren't expecting, a rare Pokémon in an unexpected location, a new creature in water you thought you had fully explored, is to recreate that childhood feeling Tadari was chasing when he built the franchise. Let's also take a moment with some of the competitive history of Water type that isn't often discussed at length. In the early days of competitive play, during the era of Generation 1, the Water type was genuinely dominant in a way that hasn't been fully replicated since. Starmie, a Water and Psychic type, was considered one of the single best Pokémon in the metagame. It had extremely high speed, a wide move pool including Thunderbolt and Ice Beam alongside its water moves, and Psychic type was functionally broken in Generation 1 because its counters, Bug type and Ghost type, were both effectively useless due to bugs in the game's code. Starmie combined two of the strongest type identities of that era into one fast, versatile, and difficult-to-predict package. Players who had never heard the word metagame still instinctively knew that Starmie was dangerous. Slowbro was another Generation 1 Water type with an outsized role in competitive play. Its combination of enormous special stat, which in Generation 1 covered both special attack and special defense, and respectable physical defense made it a wall that was extremely difficult to deal with using conventional strategies. Cloyster, the water and ice type shellfish, had a defense stat of 180, which was the highest in the game and made it essentially invincible against physical attacks in certain situations. In Generation 2, the introduction of Special Defense as a separate stat from Special Attack somewhat reduced the dominance of a few key water types, but it also enabled new ones. The addition of breeding and egg moves gave Water-type Pokémon access to moves they couldn't learn in earlier generations, expanding their potential significantly. Rain Dance teams began to form. The game's time-based mechanics, the day and night cycle, aligned naturally with Water-type Pokémon that could only be found at certain times, giving water a mysterious quality even within the game's everyday systems. Generation 3 introduced abilities, which transformed Water-type's competitive identity entirely. Torrent gave starters a late-game boost. Swift Swim allowed certain water types to become the fastest Pokémon in the game under rain. Water Absorb gave defensive water types a way to heal by absorbing attacks that would normally damage them. Shell Armor protected certain water types from critical hits. The addition of abilities created an enormous amount of strategic depth that made water-type teams feel genuinely varied rather than monolithic. The Swift Swim and Drizzle combination, where a Pokémon with Drizzle would set permanent rain and then a Pokémon with Swift Swim would double its speed in that rain, became one of the most debated and eventually banned strategies in competitive history. While the combination was effective enough at high levels of play that it was eventually ruled illegal, requiring either Drizzle or Swift Swim Pokémon to be used, but not both simultaneously. This ruling, which varied across different competitive formats and organizations, sparked some of the most passionate discussions in competitive Pokémon history. Generation 4 brought the physical special split, which liberated Pokémon like Gyarados from the awkward situation of having a high attack but no physical water moves. Waterfall and Aqua Tail became the go-to physical water moves for hard hitters, while specially oriented water types continued to use Hydro Pump and Surf. The split made Water type one of the most mechanically flexible types in the game, able to threaten from both offensive dimensions simultaneously. Rotom Wash. A Ghost and Electric type that takes on Water-type characteristics in its Wash form became one of the most used Pokémon in competitive play during the Generation 5, 6, and 7 eras. Its typing gave it enormous defensive utility, with only ground type being able to hit it super effectively, while it threatened back with electric type moves and Scald. Its combination of the Will-O-Wisp move, which burns physical attackers and halves their damage, with Scald's 30% burn chance meant that any physical attacker sending a move into Rotom Wash was risking a crippling burn regardless of how they attacked. Tapu Fini, the water and fairy type island guardian from Alola, created misty terrain when it was sent out, which reduced the power of dragon type moves and prevented non-flying Pokemon from being inflicted with status conditions. In a metagame where status conditions like paralysis, sleep, and burn were common tools for defensive strategies, Misty Terrain's protective quality was genuinely impactful, and Tapu Fini's defensive bulk made it a fixture in high-level team compositions throughout Generation 7. Barraskewda, mentioned earlier as the fastest water type, became one of the defining offensive threats of Generation 8 Rain teams. Under Rain, with its swift swim ability doubling its speed, a Barraskewda using Liquidation could defeat or severely damage nearly anything in the game before those opponents could move. Its Choice Band set, which locked it into one move but increased its power by 50%, was particularly terrifying. Opposing players had roughly a turn to either handle Barraskewda before it moved, or ensure they had a counter already in play. Dondozo, and introduced in Generation 9, became famous for a combination with Tatsugiri that was immediately recognized as one of the most powerful in the game's history. When Tatsugiri is on the field and uses its commander ability while Dondozo is also present, Tatsugiri retreats into Dondozo's mouth and Dondozo receives +2 boosts to all of its stats. This immediately turns a 500+ base stat total Pokemon into a monster at +2 across the board. The strategy, which became known informally as the Dondozo and Tatsugiri core, was one of the most discussed and countered strategies of the Generation's competitive season. Let's return now to some of the lore and mythology around specific water-type Pokemon that we haven't yet fully explored tonight. Slowpoke's relationship with its evolutions is one of the stranger threads in the franchise. In the original games, Slowpoke could evolve into Slowbro when a Shelder clamped onto its tail during an accidental encounter. Slowking, introduced in Generation 2, results from a Shelder attaching to Slowpoke's head instead, after Slowpoke is traded while holding a King's Rock. The Shelder on Slowking's head injects venom that, rather than causing harm, stimulates Slowking's brain to extraordinary levels, making it one of the most intelligent Pokemon in the franchise. The same creature that was so slow and vacant it took several seconds to register pain becomes, with the right Shelder in the right location, a Pokemon of remarkable wisdom. This is another piece of Water-type's transformation narrative. The vessel was always capable. It just needed the right catalyst. The Clefairy that lives on Mount Moon in the original games is not a water type, but there is a quiet story about the pool at its base that water-type fans have always appreciated. The Pokemon that inhabit the water roots near Mount Moon in the original games feel like a different ecosystem from the ocean roots further along. Tentacool and Tentacruel fill the waters around the southern coastline. Goldeen circles in shallow ponds. Gyarados lurks in deep lakes. Each body of water in the Pokemon world has its own ecology, its own particular assembly of water-type Pokemon that makes it feel distinct. And this was an intentional design principle even in the earliest games. Tentacool and Tentacruel occupy a space that the franchise has always been willing to acknowledge as part of Water-type's ecological reality. They're based on jellyfish, which are among the most genuinely dangerous marine creatures in the real world. Tentacruel in particular, with its 80 tentacles and body described as almost entirely composed of water, except for its rubbery outer layer, feels designed to represent something about the ocean that is not entirely safe. The franchise has always been careful to include Pokemon that remind players the ocean is not domesticated just because you can fish in it. The ocean routes in the games have always carried a distinct atmospheric quality. Routes 19, 20, and 21 in Kanto, connecting Pallet Town to Cinnabar Island through open water, had the particular feeling of crossing something large and exposed. The sprites in the early games were simple, but the implication was clear. You were crossing deep open water. The horizon went forever. Tentacruel could appear at any moment, tentacles wide, ready to make the crossing more complicated. This atmospheric quality deepened through the generations. Hoenn, the region based on the Kyushu island of Japan, was famously criticized by some players for having too much water, with several routes consisting almost entirely of surfable ocean with a few small islands dotting the path. But for players who loved the ocean, those routes felt like genuine exploration. Underwater routes accessible only through dive created an entire subworld that existed below the surface of the already existing world. There were ruins down there. There were sea creatures that existed only in those depths. The seafloor cavern, where Kyogre slept, felt like it had earned its place precisely because reaching it required crossing all that open water. Alola, and the region based on Hawaii, made the ocean central in a different way. It placed the player in an island culture where the ocean was not a boundary to be crossed, but a living presence. Water-type Pokémon trainers in Alola had a different relationship with their Pokémon from trainers in continental regions. Lana described the ocean as a place of mystery and possibility, not as a route to somewhere else. Galar brought Nessa and the coastal city of Hulbury, where fishing industry and Pokémon training were intertwined in a way that felt genuinely rooted in a specific economic and cultural reality. Paldea introduced the coastlines of the sea as a place where things emerged, where Pokémon from different ecological strata mixed along the shoreline, and where the ocean was vast enough that it could hold different regional evolutionary cousins of things you already knew. Before we close, there are a few design details worth pausing on. The visual language of water-type Pokémon, the consistent use of blue, teal, and white in their color schemes, was not always as deliberate as it appears. In the early games, the color palettes were severely limited by hardware. But as technology advanced and artists gained more tools, the water type's color identity became increasingly sophisticated. Modern water type Pokémon use blues that range from the bright, almost electric blue of Azumarill, to the deep near-black navy of Sharpedo, to the translucent pale blue of Wishiwashi. The spectrum covers everything water can look like, from mountain springs to midnight ocean depths. The sounds associated with water-type Pokémon have also become part of their identity over time. Cry design for water types in the original games tended toward gurgling, bubbling, or high-pitched tones that suggested lightness and fluidity. As cry design became more sophisticated, water-type Pokémon were given sounds that occupied a wider emotional range. Kyogre's cry is enormous, resonant, and slightly unsettling. Wishiwashi's cry is small and plaintive. Primarina's cry has a musical quality that fits its singer identity. The audio dimension of water type has been quietly consistent across 30 years of game development. In competitive doubles, water type consistently ranks as one of the most broadly represented types at high levels of play. The reason is strategic versatility. A water type Pokémon can be a speed sweeper under rain, a defensive wall with passive healing, a sun counter with its neutrality or immunity to fire type moves, a burn distributor through Scald, a terrain setter, or a trick room setter depending on its stats and moveset. No other type offers quite the same range of strategic niches simultaneously. This makes water type an anchor for many team compositions, the reliable piece around which everything else is built. The franchise has also used water type symbolically in its broader narrative across generations. Generation 2 introduced the ocean as a place of mystery and unreachable legend with Lugia beneath the waves. Generation 3 made the ocean the center of a civilization-ending conflict. Generation 4 placed the primordial ocean in the context of a narrative about the creation of the universe. Generation 7 found the ocean as a community, not an ecosystem, something to be protected and understood rather than merely crossed. The water type's narrative role has evolved alongside the franchise's own thematic ambitions. Tonight, drifting through 160 facts about water type Pokémon, we've touched on myths about dragons born from leaping carp. We've talked about a burnt tower and 3 creatures resurrected as embodiments of lightning and fire and rain. We've visited the creation of oceans by an ancient whale-like god that slept in a seafloor cavern until human foolishness woke it. We've talked about a small fish that becomes the demon of the sea when it calls for help. We've talked about the most common type in Pokémon history and why that makes sense when you think about how much of this planet is water. So the ocean has always been where human stories went when they needed to get bigger. The ship launching towards something unknown, the creature surfacing from the dark. The storm that changes everything. Water-type Pokémon are built from those stories. The franchise understood from the beginning that water meant possibility, danger, depth, and transformation, and it built more Pokémon around those ideas than any other. There are 162 Water-type Pokémon, and we're still counting. The unfinished ocean. Things that almost happened, and things that did. There's a particular kind of quiet satisfaction in learning not just what Pokemon exists, but what almost existed instead. The water type has a rich history of scrapped ideas, changed designs, and abandoned directions that give us a window into the creative process behind some of the franchise's most beloved creatures. Early beta footage from Pokemon Red and Green, which has been partially revealed through leaks over the years, shows several water-type Pokemon at very different stages of development. An early version of Gyarados looked nothing like the majestic serpent the world knows. It was worm-like, eyeless, covered in teeth, something from a fever dream rather than a Chinese dragon legend. The design was reconceived entirely before the games launched, and the result was arguably the most visually striking evolutionary jump in the franchise. But it's worth sitting with the fact that the Gyarados we know almost didn't exist in its current form. Scrap plans from Gold and Silver's development included a Johto Safari Zone that was coded into the game but never activated. The Johto games, notably, removed the Safari Zone that had been a Kanto feature, and for years players who used cheat devices found empty map data where a Safari Zone might have gone. When Heart Gold and Soul Silver were released years later, they included a full-featured Safari Zone in the Johto region, apparently Game Freak's answer to the long-running questions about the missing area. Given how many water-type Pokemon populated the Safari Zone in later games, the absence in the original Johto games was a meaningful one. One of the more interesting what-ifs in water-type history involves Poliwrath. In the original games, Poliwrath was the final evolution of Poliwag's line, a water and fighting type with a design built around the concentric swirl on its stomach that represents a visible digestive system through transparent skin. When Gold and Silver were developed, the designers created Polidode as an alternate final evolution using the trade mechanic, offering a route that split the line into a warrior and a dancer. The existence of Polidode essentially reframed Poliwrath's identity retroactively. Poliwrath was no longer the definitive endpoint of the Poliwag line. It was one possible outcome, and Politoed was another. This choice opened up design conversations that would continue for many generations, eventually becoming part of how Game Freak thought about giving Pokemon branching evolutionary options. Goldeen, the water-type fish-like Pokemon known for its long, elegant horn, it was originally designed with a very different color scheme. Early concept art shows versions that were more silver and gray rather than the white and red we know, which would have given it a visual identity closer to a real koi fish rather than the stylized goldfish it became. The change toward white and red created a more striking contrast and made the Pokemon read more clearly at the small resolution of the original Game Boy screen. In Pokemon X and Y, there were plans for additional water-type routes in the Kalos region that were ultimately cut from the game. The final version of X and Y is notable for having the fewest water-type Pokemon of any generation, just 9. And the relative scarcity of aquatic areas compared to earlier games contributed to a feeling among some players that Kalos felt less aquatically rich than Hoenn or Sinnoh. The cuts appear to have been made for pacing reasons, as the Kalos games were designed to move faster and more cinematically than earlier entries. Wallace's history as both a gym leader and a champion is one of the more complicated character arcs in the franchise. In the original Ruby and Sapphire, he appeared only as the leader of Pseudopolis City's gym, a water-type specialist who stood before the Cave of Origin. In Emerald, he was elevated to champion status, with Stephen Stone stepping aside. This change was not without controversy among fans who had grown attached to Stephen, and it gave the games a meaningfully different emotional ending depending on which version you played. There is a small but significant detail in Heart Gold and Soul Silver that goes almost entirely unnoticed. On Route 25 in the game's post-story content, there is a figure standing at the cliff edge of the cape overlooking the ocean. It's Misty, out of her gym uniform, looking out at the water. She doesn't battle the player in that moment. She's just standing where she apparently comes to think. There's no dialogue box that explains it or draws attention to it. It's one of the quietest character moments in franchise history. A small gift to players who have always cared about her. The design of Seal and Dugong has an interesting history. Seal is based on a seal, and Dugong combines Dugong with the word dew, referencing its icy qualities. Dugong was one of the first water and ice types introduced and helped establish the dual type's identity as a creature of cold ocean waters. In the original anime, Misty's battle against Lorelei of the Elite Four featured Dugong prominently on Lorelei's side, which contributed to the Ice Seal line feeling associated with serious, skilled water-type trainers rather than casual ocean wanderers. The Whiscash evolutionary line from Generation 3 has an origin that most Western players completely miss. Barboach and Whiscash are based on the Namazu, a giant catfish from Japanese mythology that is said to live beneath the earth and cause earthquakes when it thrashes. The Japanese name for Whiscash is Namazuri, directly referencing the Namazu. The lore around the Namazu, that it is controlled by the god Kashima who pins it with a sacred stone, and that when Kashima's attention lapses, the Namazu's thrashing causes tremors felt on the surface, maps almost perfectly onto Whiscash's design as a Pokémon associated with mud, ground shaking, and unpredictable behavior. One of the most interesting water-type ecological stories in the games involves the Poliwag line's placement in the world. Poliwag is found in ponds, lakes, and slow-moving rivers in almost every region, suggesting it is one of the most cosmopolitan and adaptable freshwater Pokémon in the franchise. Its near universal availability across regions is a piece of environmental storytelling. Poliwag is a survivor. It thrives wherever there is shallow water and something to eat. The concentric swirl visible through its translucent skin, which represents its internal organs, is a biological detail unusual enough that the games have always treated it as one of Pokémon's signature pieces of naturalistic world-building. Corsola's tragedy in the Galar games prompted one of the more open conversations about the franchise's relationship with real-world environmental concerns. Galarian Corsola's ghostly bleached form was widely read as a direct reference to coral bleaching events, and the games did nothing to soften that reading. Corsola's Pokédex entry notes that its body is now an overflowing ectoplasm, the living energy that has nowhere to go because the physical body that held it is dead. It's one of the most haunting entries in the franchise, and it exists specifically to make players feel the weight of what it represents. Keldeo's story deserves more time than it often receives. By introduced in Generation 5 as the fourth member of the Swords of Justice alongside Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, Keldeo is the youngest of the group, a colt who desperately wants to be taken seriously by its three senior partners. Its transformation into its resolute form, which happens when it learns the move Secret Sword, represents a coming-of-age moment. The creature only fully becomes itself in battle, when it stops performing bravery and simply is brave. Its water typing comes from its Kelpie inspiration, the dangerous Scottish water horse that lures travelers to drowning deaths. But Keldeo inverts that darkness completely, channeling the imagery of a water horse toward genuine heroism. Phione is one of the most peculiar entries in the franchise's mythology. It is the only mythical Pokémon that can be bred, as Manaphy can produce Phione eggs when left with Ditto. However, Phione cannot evolve into Manaphy, making it a mythical Pokémon of genuinely lower power than its parent. The Pokédex entries for Phione describe it as a Pokémon that drifts on warm ocean currents, waiting to return to its birthplace. There is something quietly melancholy about a creature whose existence is defined by waiting to go somewhere it can never quite reach, especially given that even if it evolved, it could only become the parent that produced it. Phione represents a kind of gentle, unresolved longing that is unusual in the franchise. The relationship between Manaphy and the Sea Temple in the anime film Pokémon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea gave Manaphy its fullest characterization. In that film, Manaphy is a small, curious creature born without memories who gradually bonds with May as a mother figure. The film's emotional core turns on whether Manaphy will choose to stay with May or return to the sea where it belongs. The ocean in that film is not a threat or a mystery. It is home. The creatures of the deep are family. The sea itself is described as something that recognizes and calls to those who belong to it. It's one of the franchise's most complete meditations on what water-type Pokémon actually represent, that the ocean is not just a type or a mechanic or a route. It is a world unto itself, with its own gravity and its own truth. Cramorant's complete, inexplicable firing of a Pikachu out of its own body when injured in battle remains one of the most joyfully unhinged details in modern Pokémon design. It requires no further analysis. Yeah, it is perfect. Dracovish, one of the mismatched fossil Pokémon introduced in Generation 8, is a water and dragon type created from incorrectly assembled fossil parts. Its upper body is a prehistoric fish. Its lower body is a prehistoric foot and leg. They were never meant to be one creature. Its Pokédex entries describe it as a deeply unhappy creature that struggles to breathe properly and cannot survive in the wild. Dracovish is also one of the strongest physical attackers in the game, due to the combination of its vicious rend move and strong jaw ability, making it simultaneously the most tragic and one of the most brutally powerful water types in competitive history. The game made an ethical statement about fossil resurrection and also made the resurrected creature broken and devastating at the same time, which feels intentional in a darkly funny way. Araquanid, introduced in Generation 7, carries a bubble over its head that it uses to breathe, to protect itself, and to trap prey. The water bubble ability doubles the power of its water-type moves and makes it immune to burns. This gives a relatively slow Pokémon enormous offensive output on water-type attacks, making Araquanid's liquidation hit harder than most would expect. The visual of a spider wearing a fishbowl helmet as it walks across the seafloor is exactly the kind of creature the deep ocean actually contains, which makes it both charming and slightly horrifying. The franchise has used the water type's abundance to do something that gets overlooked in discussion of type distribution. Because there are so many water types, as the franchise can afford to let individual water-type Pokémon represent very specific niches without each one needing to be a combat-viable specimen. Some water types are purely there to populate the world's ecology. Lovedisk exists to make the ocean feel romantic. Phoebus exists to make the ocean feel like something that rewards patience over raw searching ability. Corsola existed first to make a reef feel inhabited, and then to grieve the loss of that reef. The water type's sheer size means it can carry both game design and storytelling simultaneously, in a way smaller types simply cannot. The ocean in Pokémon has always been more than a route to cross. It has been the home of the franchise's oldest myths, the birthplace of its most powerful creatures, the setting for its most dramatic moments, and the metaphor at the heart of its most enduring themes. Transformation, perseverance, depth, mystery. The unknown that becomes known through patience and the willingness to look. Water is the most common type in Pokémon, but its most important quality was never its numbers. It was the particular feeling it created in every player who ever surfed across an open ocean route in a small handheld game, looking out at the horizon represented by a pixel edge, and felt for a moment that the world on the other side was genuinely vast. That feeling was real. It still is. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This video took a long time to put together, and knowing you were here for all of it means more than you realize. If you enjoyed this journey through water-type history, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. A subscription costs you nothing and helps the channel grow more than almost any other form of support. And there's a lot more coming. More types, more deep dives, more nights exactly like this one. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite water-type Pokémon. I want to know. I read everything, sleep well. The ocean will be here when you wake up.